series. I'm joined today by Alexandra Petrisano from the Canadian Mental Health Association. You want to say hi, Alex?
Hello, hi everyone.
We'll get into a little bit of Alex's background in mental health here in a second. We'll give folks kind of a couple minutes to just get kind of checked in. If you are kind of joining us for the live session, we'd love to kind of hear from you in the chat. Let us know, let us know your name. Let us know kind of maybe what city you're joining us from. If you'd like to kind of share your LinkedIn profile, allows us to kind of connect with you and other audience members to kind of connect with you there. You can find the team put my LinkedIn up on the screen there, but active on LinkedIn and good place to kind of connect. So a couple housekeeping items just to give everybody kind of the lay of the land for today's session. We've got about 30 minutes to dive in with Alex on everything kind of mental health related, and we're really going to kind of dig into kind of like the manager's role and how to kind of empower managers to really kind of support their teams through everything kind of mental health related. And so if you have any sort of questions that you'd like to ask myself, but mainly the expert here, Alex, we encourage you to kind of put those in the chat. We'll be kind of watching for those, and we can tackle them as we go. And maybe if we don't get time throughout the conversation to kind of tackle all of them, we'll leave a few minutes kind of at the end. So with that, Alex, do you want to do a quick introduction? Give us a little bit of kind of your background and how you ended up at the CMHA.
Sure, yeah. So my name is Alex. Great to meet all of you. In terms of my background, it was kind of an interesting journey that led me specifically to focusing more on workplace mental health. I actually started more in the physical safety space. So I've got a Bachelor of Science in Occupational Health and Safety, and then I worked for a number of years in various sectors, focusing specifically on protecting workers physically in very kind of safety intensive spaces, residential construction, underground tunneling, some utilities as well. But I always had a really specific interest in the space of mental health, and kind of following that thread brought me to the space of being interested in supporting folks, not just physically, but mentally as well. And so I pursued a postgraduate certificate in workplace wellness and health promotion. And then through there and kind of building that interest and desire to protect employees psychologically as well. And that brought me to CMHA, which is a very sort of mental health focused, of course, organization that really aims to just facilitate access to programs and services and supports all aimed at maintaining mental health, improving awareness, strengthening those supports in our communities, but also more specifically in our organizations as well, which is what kind of brings me here today.
Fantastic. And so to provide kind of some context to the audience, we were having a short conversation before going live here. Start from the top. Okay. The Guusto webinar. Starting from the top here. My name's Skay. I'm one of the founders here at Guusto, and I'm joined today by Alexandra Petrisano from the Canadian Mental Health Association. Alex, you want to say hi and do a quick intro for us?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Great to see you.
And so today's session going to be all about kind of how we can kind of support managers in their efforts to support their team's mental health. And so we'll dig in with kind of Alex on kind of her experience doing that. And as folks are kind of getting checked in here, feel free to kind of drop your name in the chat. Let us know kind of where you're joining us from. So I see Tyler kind of in from Vancouver here. Welcome. And if you'd like to connect with either myself or Alex, we're both kind of on LinkedIn, and so encourage folks to kind of connect with us there. And if you feel so, drop your LinkedIn in the chat there. We can kind of connect and get audience members connecting. But with that, let's dive in. If folks have questions throughout the webinar today, we've got about 30 minutes, just under. So we'll reserve a bit of time at the end for questions, but by all means, if you have questions throughout the conversation, drop them in there, and we've got an expert here that we can tackle those as we go. So with that, Alex, do you want to provide just a quick little background on kind of your experience and what's led you to, the CMHA and focusing on kind of mental health training?
Sure, yeah. Well, hi, everyone. My name is Alex. I am currently the workplace mental health sort of specialist and trainer here at CMHA National, but I've got a pretty sort of interesting background that led me very specifically into the space at CMHA. So I kind of started more so in the physical safety space. So I actually have a Bachelor of Science in Occupational Health and Safety, and I focused for a number of years on protecting workers physically. But I always had a real kind of personal interest and passion for mental health. And so, doing a little bit of digging, thinking a little bit about how I can kind of bring those worlds together brought me more specifically to the space of psychological health and safety. And so, following the years that I spent in that physical space, I also achieved a postgraduate certificate in workplace wellness and health promotion, which really allowed me to, focus more specifically on that personal passion piece, and kind of what brought me to the Canadian Mental Health Association. And so today, I work alongside many folks within my organization to, facilitate access to programs, services, supports, all of these areas aiming to maintain mental health, and improve awareness, strengthening support within our communities, but also, within our workplaces and our organizations as well.
Fantastic. And, we're big fans of the Canadian Mental Health Association. In fact, Joe, my co-founder, and myself, we've kind of pledged 1% of our kind of shares here at Guusto to the Canadian Mental Health Association, so that in the event that, there's ever kind of an exit or this company's acquired, we can make a contribution to your organization's efforts. To provide a little bit more context, Alex, like on the day-to-day, walk us through, like, you're connecting kind of directly with organizations big and small. You'll go in and kind of run training sessions. What does that look like?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, so organizations often come to us with concerns or really just interest in wanting to kind of dive deeper into the conversation of mental health, and we'll kind of work together to decide on what that exactly looks like based off of needs or interests, and then we'll develop a learning session together. So that often comes in the form of either shorter kind of 1 hour sessions to longer, half or even full day opportunities for us to just dig a bit deeper into what that could look like. So, topics range from, individual skills for building, resilience, or, more organizationally, what we can do to support, mental health in the workplace, what individuals can do, what can leaders do, especially, is something that we definitely talk a lot about, appreciating that there is, definitely that really significant role that leaders can play, but also that responsibility, right, to protect the mental health and well-being of their teams.
Okay, great. Well, let's get into it, right? I think kind of a common question that your team gets asked and is kind of throughout kind of the industry is just like, what are some signs that, like, a team member may be struggling that managers might kind of like look for in terms of like mental health?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that's a really important kind of first step, right? Being able to assist someone, before we even get there, we need to be able to identify when they need that support from us. And so I think, there are some common things that we can look out for, especially for thinking about the workplace, things like changes to, productivity, quantity or quality of work, missing deadlines, not seeming to be able to kind of stay on top of some of those typical responsibilities. But really, I think more than that, what we're looking for at an even higher level is just a change, and more specifically, I think a change from what is considered typical for that individual. Also appreciating that we present ourselves very differently. Things like a change in their communication, right? Some of us are a bit quieter naturally, and that's totally okay. But, if that person is usually very social, but now they're seeming to be a bit more withdrawn, or, someone who's, very chipper in the morning, but, they don't seem to be coming to the workplace with that same level of energy. Those are the things I think at a kind of high level that we want to look out for is just a change, from what they typically kind of present themselves as in the workplace. And if we do notice some of those signs, are we then acting on what we've noticed to then get into, facilitating some of those conversations?
Okay. Okay. So let's dive in there. So let's say kind of, I noticed that somebody on my team, might be showing up late and not hitting their deadlines, kind of, and like they typically have. How, as a manager, do kind of approach that conversation initially?
Yeah, so I think kind of leaning into some of those signs that we do notice is a really great first step. And I think, especially if we're thinking about making sure that we approach that conversation with that level of, understanding. We're not making any assumptions. We're directly acting on what we've noticed as a result of being physically in the same space as them, right? And it gives us that opportunity to ask those open-ended questions about what you might be able to do to support them. And I think that's a really
Hmm.
important bit as well, is really asking with that level of openness to allow them to kind of facilitate the flow of the conversation, or allowing them to dictate the pace, or allowing them to dictate just how much they want to share with you. So we're really opening the door to them to let us know what it is that we can do to support them. And it really could be as easy as saying, I've noticed you do seem to be a bit more, reserved than what's typical for you, or you seemed a little bit distracted, during our team meeting today. Is everything okay? And it can really be as easy as that, as long as we're making sure to ask those questions, with intention, and making sure that they know that we're asking those questions coming from a place of care and concern. We don't
Hmm.
want to make anybody feel as though this is we're diving all of a sudden into, a performance related kind of conversation. Of course, this could be a subset of the conversation, but really what's most important, especially when we're just first initiating the conversation, is that we're asking with that intention and with that level of care.
Okay. And so let's imagine then, just kind of like role playing here, scenario playing,
Sure.
that employee, kind of shares with their manager that they're struggling with something, right? Whether it's kind of something at home, or maybe something kind of at work that's challenging them. How as a manager can I kind of make them feel safe? Can I create that kind of supportive environment?
Mhm. Yeah, so I think more than anything, I think validation is really important. Making sure that you hear them, and that they know that you hear them, can really do a lot for an individual. I think, even just reflecting on the last time you didn't feel, 100%, and you
Mm,
chose to share that with someone, having someone just say, you know what, yeah, that sounds really tough. I can appreciate how hard it is to focus on, work when you've got X, Y, and Z on your plate. And that really can be enough to kind of open the door to have them feel validated enough to then share with you what those next steps could actually look like. And I think, there's a lot of other things that we can kind of take into consideration. Things like, where we host the conversation. Is there somewhere where we can make sure that this is, comfortable and private, that there's nobody, else around? Can we kind of close a door behind us and have a little bit more of an intimate opportunity? Anything that allows them to feel a bit more safe and comfortable to disclose can only help us, right? To then get to the bottom of what that could actually, look like. And then just being mindful of the way that we kind of travel through the conversation. Things like, subtle affirmations, nodding our head, yep, I hear you, thanks for sharing. Anything that we can do to kind of ease them along in that conversation, can only help us to get more information about what exactly that would actually look like in terms of accommodating some of those concerns.
Yeah, okay, and we can get into kind of accommodating and how to kind of approach you know strategizing there and working with the employee. But I want to pull on a couple threads. I really loved your point around kind of like validation and sharing, like as a manager, sharing like your story. Oh, wow. Okay. I can totally empathize with that situation. A few years ago, this happened to me. And I remember just being kind of like really stressed out about that and had to take some time to kind of step back. So I think, kind of sharing a little bit of vulnerability with the employee can really help there. I would like to kind of tackle Stephanie's question here. Thank you, Stephanie, for kind of sharing. So she says, how do you approach the conversation, or how you approach the conversation does depend on your relationship and trust with the employee. Can you more of a comment than a question, but can you maybe kind of walk us through, you know, if you've got a very kind of like trusting relationship with the employee? I think what we just discussed is kind of a good approach. But what, how do we approach things when maybe it's like a newer employee, or there has been kind of some trust breakdown in the
Hmm.
relationship there?
Yeah, that's a really great question for sure. And I think if we kind of take a step back and we think about the culture that we kind of create around some of these conversations, it can really help us to then be able to facilitate those conversations when it does come to be that time. And what I mean by that is, there are kind of subtle things that we can do to increase that level of sort of trust before we even get to a place where we need to have these conversations. So, things like, and you shared it earlier about, even as a leader, showing that level of vulnerability. If that's common practice, if we are all as a team, openly discussing when things aren't, 100%, or if maybe we facilitate, regular check-ins with each other, before we start team meetings, what are we all, coming to the meeting at? Are we a 10? Are we a 5? Are we a 4? It allows us to kind of facilitate some of those conversations. It also allows us to understand a little bit more about each other, so that, like we were saying earlier, some of us are maybe just quieter people, but if we learn a little bit more about the individual, and we take the time to
Mm.
really get to know that person, it'll be a lot easier for us to then identify when they're not necessarily acting like themselves. And so if we kind of build that sort of culture around us being open and being willing to discuss, it's not going to be a total, left field question when my leader all of a sudden asks me, what's going on. We're going to feel as though we have that level of, rapport with each other, even if it's not at that same level of depth as actually intensively kind of asking somebody what's wrong. We'll feel a bit more comfortable, I think, in general. So really, I think that kind of just brings back to those really subtle things that we can do as leaders to build that trust over time, so that we're not asking for it, all at once, in those really important conversations.
And it kind of reminds me, we were just on a kind of a client trip. So we went to visit one of our kind of bigger clients, and we had the opportunity to kind of meet their CEO at a bit of a holiday party. And it was just amazing to watch this CEO kind of go around the room, and there was hundreds of people there. He knew everybody's name. He knew who had kids. He knew da, 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 da. And so the level of kind of trust that he had kind of built with not just with his direct reports, but like deep into the organization was outstanding, and obviously kind of a beacon for kind of other managers to kind of do the same. And it creates the space then for kind of some of these conversations when people may not be performing, or may be kind of demonstrating that they've got kind of issues. So one piece that you mentioned there, Alex, was around kind of like where to host the conversation, right? And kind of what sort of physical space. A lot of employees are working remotely or in hybrid situations. Can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges and kind of training that you've done around kind of looking for and supporting employees? And here at Guusto, like we're 100% remote.
Yeah.
So how can we get better at kind of supporting employees kind of remotely?
Totally. Yeah, and that is definitely something that I hear a lot from, because we are shifting to this much more kind of flexible landscape. And I think we do need to be a bit more intentional then with our moments of connection, I think, with each other, because otherwise, we don't have that same level of, casual opportunities to connect. So I think that's exactly it, right? We need to be a bit more intentional with the time that we set aside to connect with everyone. So maybe then that means that we do have these regular kind of weekly virtual check-ins. Maybe that means that we have, regular opportunities for us to meet as, larger teams, making sure that we're really carving out those times to connect, but also maybe then going a bit deeper to say that we're going to specifically carve out times to not talk about work. At CMHA, we are also quite flexible. And so we'll always start off every team meeting with a little bit of a icebreaker kind of question. What did you do over the holidays? What's your favorite meal? Things like that, that just allow us to be a bit more kind of casual with each other, so that we can build that sort of level of interactivity with each other that we sometimes get organically when we are in person. And then in terms of supporting, it is in a lot of ways quite similar. We still can be attentive to an individual's change in a virtual space as well. Maybe my camera's off when it was on before. Maybe when I instant message someone, they're just seeming to be a bit harder to reach. These are still signs that we can kind of look out for and then adapt in terms of, hosting a virtual call with a person, then instead of, inviting them into your office, but still being mindful of what space we create there. So still, making sure we have a quiet place to facilitate that conversation, still making sure that it's as confidential as possible, giving someone forewarning, that we're going to be having this conversation, so that we're not all of a sudden, jumping into, their kitchen or wherever, without that level of preparation, right? So it's still kind of valid in that way. We just might need to, go a little bit further and be a bit more intentional with our opportunities to connect when we do.
Okay. And you see CEOs like the leader at Nvidia kind of talking about having 60 direct reports and not doing one-on-ones, and kind of breaking the mold there a little bit. But I think that if you are a hybrid or a remote organization, it is important to be a little bit intentional about having some of those meetings kind of on the calendar, because you're not running into those people and having kind of that quick check-in in the physical space. And so they do kind of play an important role in those remote environments. We've got a question here from Sarah, and it actually kind of lines up really well with kind of where I was going next. But she says, when an employee does choose to share a struggle from this conversation, what is the next step for a manager? What strategies or tools can a manager use or suggest in this case? So lots there, but like, are there specific tools or resources that managers should have on hand to kind of be ready to support their teams?
Yeah, so totally. I think in terms of the conversation specifically about, accommodating that individual, or what's the next step, together, that is going to very much depend on what the individual is actually sharing with you and what would work best for that individual. And so it's a bit tricky to list, exactly what that would look like, because we want to be open to kind of exploring that together. But in terms of specific kind of resources, there are lots of free to access resources that we can leverage in our communities. But more specifically than that, I do always make this kind of helpful suggestion to leaders to have kind of a cheat sheet, really, of resources on hand that they can share with an individual should they disclose that they need that support and are open to exploring those. And things like phone numbers, community resources, CMHA National, for example, or even internally, knowing the employee family assistance program that's available to you, knowing any sort of wellness kind of initiatives that are available to your organization. It can really be helpful as the leader to be that sort of liaison to some of those resources. Because if you think about the other side of things, when an individual is not at 100%, any sort of perceived barrier to that care could be enough to keep them from accessing it. They don't want to go through the effort to find what that number is, or find what that URL is, or find out how to log in. So if we have that information on hand and we walk them through it, it increases the likelihood that they'll be able to or want to access that care. And especially if we think about it coming directly from the leader to say, you know
Mm.
what, there's a really great resource that's available. Let's kind of break down the sort of stigma to accessing that care. And let me show you how. Let me help you through it. Let's even call the number together, whatever kind of helps them to facilitate that access. Even as leaders ourselves, we can go through some of those numbers, listen, what's on the other line when you call, access it yourself if you need it. There's lots of things that we can do, but having those resources on hand and being that connection can help them, be a bit more kind of encouraged to access it.
And I think you highlighted something really important there is that it's not on the manager or the leader to just point people to the HR department and say, hey, go talk to HR, they can sort you out, they got it. But instead, kind of like reaching out to the HR department directly, kind of, hey, what resources do we typically have? Have we seen this, elsewhere in the organization? Um, are there some kind of templates or kind of playbooks on that might help me as a manager, because I'm the one that has the relationship directly with that employee, right? And so I'm in a much kind of healthier position to kind of help that employee kind of take those first steps. um, Love that question. Thank you, Sarah. In circling back on kind of something you mentioned around kind of like accommodations, so we've had the conversation, we've shared some resources, we're now balancing the employee's needs with the needs of the business. And so what have you seen in terms of like kind of accommodations and how that kind of gets figured out between the organization? And maybe you could take us through kind of like a use case.
Yeah, so that's a really great conversation, and I think something that lots of people are kind of considering, I think, when they're opening the door to accommodations. But really, when we think about accommodating something like a mental health concern, they are more often than not fairly low to no cost solutions, as long as we're open to that little bit of kind of flexibility. So it can look like something like exploring a more kind of flexible work schedule while this
Mm-hmm.
individual is trying to kind of navigate it. Maybe they work better, later into the day or very early in the morning, so that they can attend, other appointments or responsibilities. Maybe there's just a moment where they might need a little bit more of assistance through, a task, or maybe we as a team can kind of discuss, reprioritizing things that are maybe not so important with things that might be, as long as we're open to kind of exploring that conversation together and really aim to answer two main questions, which is, what can I do for you, but also what can you do for yourself? We can, more often than not, achieve that kind of short-term support while that individual is needing to kind of recover or, evaluate, some of those concerns, and appreciating that sometimes things don't go as swimmingly as we're saying that they are. And so if we do need to bring in other individuals like HR to have a little bit of a conversation about core responsibilities, then that might be something that we might need to explore. But I think in terms of being that initial support as a leader, it's really important for us to just kind of be open to exploring exactly what that looks like for that specific individual, because it is such a unique sort of conversation.
And I think a lot of it, I forget where I've kind of heard this, but like clarity is kindness, right? And if managers can be very clear about the expectations for the role and the business, we can work together to figure out like, hey, how can we accomplish these? And I think flexibility is kind of a big kind of component to that. So Alex, coming up on kind of the half hour mark here. What would you say is kind of like the number one takeaway you want listeners to kind of walk away kind of remembering from this discussion?
Yeah, I think honestly, more than anything, I think it's really just appreciating the important role that leaders can and should play in kind of shaping the culture of support in the workplace, and really taking advantage, frankly, of how much we can lead by example. And really kind of set the tone to be the culture that we want to kind of see within our organization. And there's lots of really subtle ways that we can do this as leaders, leading by example, walking the talk, as they say, in terms of, mental health conversations, being vulnerable, asking how folks are doing with intention, leaning into those signs that we're noticing, really kind of leveraging just how much we can make a difference, I think, in terms of, making people feel seen and supported in the workplace, because we do spend, so much of our time here. And so, we might as well feel, supported while we're here.
Okay, fantastic. And I think you mentioned you've got a great resource at CMHA to help organizations with this.
Yeah, we absolutely do. So, we've got a really fantastic resource that some folks on the line may be familiar with, but if not, I'll give you a little bit of a quick kind of rundown. It's actually called our Not Myself Today program. It's our national, workplace mental health program. Essentially, it's a kind of an awareness and capacity building program. But, as part of our most recent improvements, we are, super excited to have created a specific, 5-part interactive kind of e-learning series that is specifically for leaders and managers to learn some of the really helpful skills that we've talked about today to kind of support their teams and themselves. So, when you kind of sign on to this kind of subscription based service, you get about 4 hours of learning that you can complete, at your own pace, at your own time on a variety of topics related to mental health. Whether that's kind of foundations of mental health all the way to, shifting that culture that we were talking about. And so, it's a really kind of helpful mix of, learning, animations, expert videos. We've also got a kind of employee side that we can, as, managers kind of roll out to continue that learning down into our teams as well. And so it's a really, really great resource that we're always improving. And most specifically, we are really proud of that kind of manager piece. So I'd love to chat with anybody that wants to hear more about that.
Yeah, I mean, organizations are kind of looking for kind of easy ways, right, to get their managers up to speed. So, notmyselftoday.ca. Yeah, go check it out. And we didn't talk too much about kind of recognition today. We're kind of a employee recognition centered company, and it does. Play a bit of a role in kind of creating that relationship with employees, and establishing kind of trust and creating that kind of culture and environment where employees feel safe to kind of share some of the challenges they've been facing. So if you are looking for kind of anything kind of employee recognition related, that's us at Guusto. We've got a great kind of pitch kit resource. If you're looking for kind of help just putting together the case to present to your executive teams, check it out there, the executive pitch kit. And with that, Alex, it's been lovely to chat with you for the last half hour. Thank you for taking time out of your day. And if folks want to kind of connect directly with Alex, go find her on LinkedIn. You can find me there as well. And with that, we'll wish everybody a great day. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, everyone. Great chatting.